Hi, music lovers. Get ready for a deep dive that'll transport you straight to the sun-soaked 1980s Caribbean. We're talking Zouk music.
Oh, yeah. Get those dancing shoes ready because we're about to uncover a musical revolution you won't believe.
And to guide us, we've got not one, but two sonic pioneers to learn from.
Hit me with it.
First up, Willy Salzedo. This guy's a Zouk mastermind. Composer, collaborator with the legendary Kassams, and he's got a fascinating conference about the iconic Jacob Desvarieux that we're diving into.
Color me intrigued. Who's our second guide?
Hold on to your hats, because
Yeah.
we're also tapping into the mind of Guadeloupean musician Kris Jam.
Now we're talking. Two perspectives on this Zouk revolution. Let's get this deep dive started.
You know, diving into Salcedo's conference, I was blown away by how he portrayed Jacob Desvarieux. This wasn't just a musician, this was a tech visionary. We're talking about the 80s when computers were just starting to boom, and Desvarieux was already using things like the Atari 1040 ST and software like Creator to shape the Zouk sound. Wild, right?
It's mind-blowing. Imagine being in his shoes, riding that wave of early MIDI technology. It's like he instantly knew the power it held.
Whoa, hold up a sec. You said MIDI. For those of us who might not speak fluent musician, break that down. What is MIDI, and why was it such a big deal?
Right. MIDI, or Musical Instrument Digital Interface, basically allowed instruments like keyboards and drum machines to communicate with each other and even with computers. Before MIDI, creating intricate electronic arrangements was crazy difficult. But then MIDI swoops in, allowing musicians to program entire drum beats, record layers upon layers of synths, and make these complex arrangements all within a computer. It was a game changer, especially for electronic genres like Zouk.
So Desvarieux was at the forefront of this digital music explosion, using these tools to essentially craft the Zouk sound.
Absolutely. What's fascinating is how he combined this cutting-edge tech with those traditional rhythms and melodies of Guadeloupe and Martinique. This fusion, this blend of old and new, acoustic and electronic, that's the heart of Zouk's unique energy.
Okay, so we've got this digital foundation, but Salcedo goes deeper. He starts talking about the specific tools Desvarieux was using. The Lindrum, the Roland R8 drum machine.
Oh man, the Lindrum. It was revolutionary for its time. Before that, drum machines sounded, well, kind of fake. But the Lindrum, those were real, punchy, organic drum sounds, and they breathed a whole new life into music. It became a staple in Zouk, giving it that driving, danceable energy.
And then there's this thing called the Akai S1000 sampler. I'll be honest, the word sampler always sounded intimidating. Can you demystify that one for me?
Think of it this way. Imagine recording any sound you can think of. A bird singing, a car horn, anything, and then being able to play that sound back at different speeds and pitches. You can even chop it up and rearrange it. That's a sampler in a nutshell. It was like having a universe of sounds at your fingertips, and Desvarieux used it to add incredible textures and layers to the music.
And of course, we can't forget the synths. Salcedo mentioned the Yamaha DX7 and Roland D50, both legendary names in the music world. What made them so special for Zouk music?
Each synth had its own distinct personality. Take the Yamaha DX7, known for its bright, clear tones. It was the secret sauce behind those shimmering, bell-like sounds that defined 80s music, including Zouk. Then you have the Roland D50, which brought this warmth and richness to the table, adding layers of texture and depth.
It's incredible how these machines, which might seem almost ancient today, completely reshaped how Zouk sounded.
And not just Zouk. Think about it. This tech wave crashed over music on a global scale. It influenced everything from pop to funk to electronic. And speaking of funk, that's where our other guide, Kris Jam, comes in.
Yeah, Kris Jam, he's at this unique viewpoint, being a Guadeloupean musician himself. He points out this really cool parallel between Zouk and American funk, how they were both evolving in the 80s.
Oh, a transatlantic connection. Okay, now I'm really interested. What does Kris Jam say about this? He talks about how those early Zouk sounds were super influenced by the funk music coming out of the US at the time, which, thinking about Desvarieux and all that technology, makes total sense. Both genres were going crazy for drum machines, synthesizers, all those new electronic toys. It's only natural they'd share some musical DNA.
Like a musical conversation happening across the ocean, each genre bouncing ideas off the other. I love that.
Exactly. And it wasn't just Zouk and funk. Kris Jam talks about how the whole decade, the 80s, was this explosion of musical experimentation. You had electronic music bleeding into pop, rock bands adding synths to their sound, even hip-hop was emerging from that whole melting pot of technology and creativity.
So this one technological shift, the rise of MIDI and electronic instruments,
Yeah.
it's like it totally reshaped the global music scene.
Right on. And it's so cool to trace those lines of influence. Kris Jam mentions all these Caribbean musicians who were inspired by what Desvarieux was doing with Zouk, guys like Frédéric Caracas, Gilles Floro, Yves Honoré. I could go on and on. All these artists taking what they learned from Zouk and creating their own sound.
Wow, a ripple effect of pure innovation, starting with pioneers like Desvarieux and spreading outward. Makes you wonder what music would sound like today if none of that had happened.
It's impossible to know for sure, but I think it's safe to say the music we know and love, it wouldn't be the same. It goes back to what Willy Salzedo was talking about in his conference, that willingness to embrace the new, to experiment, to push those creative boundaries. That's what Desvarieux was all about.
Such a good reminder that music is alive. It's constantly changing, growing, borrowing, reinventing. And sometimes the biggest leaps forward happen when artists embrace new tools, those things that seem impossible until suddenly they're not.
And you know what that makes me think about? It makes me think about the tools themselves, Like, does really understanding how all that equipment worked, does it change how we hear the music?
Almost like saying, hey, if you know the difference between a paintbrush and a palette knife, does it change how you see a painting? Does it deepen your appreciation for the art itself? I think it absolutely can.
Yeah, there's something kind of magical about knowing those warm, punchy drums you hear in Zouk. Those came from a Lindrum. Or those shimmering synth lines. That's a Yamaha DX7. It adds a whole other dimension to the experience.
Like finding out the secret recipe behind your favorite dish. Suddenly you've got this whole new appreciation for all the flavors, all those little nuances.
Exactly. Think of a chef carefully selecting each ingredient. That's what musicians like Desvarieux were doing with their instruments, with the technology. Each choice was deliberate, shaping the sound they heard in their heads. When we understand those choices, we understand their artistry on a deeper level.
This deep dive has been a wild ride. I've always loved music, always will, but now I find myself listening differently. What's the story behind that sound? What technology made that possible?
That's what it's all about, right? Exploration. It opens up your ears, your mind, everything. You start hearing things you never noticed before.
And speaking of exploration, for all you listeners out there ready to dive deeper into the world of Zouk, we've got you covered.
Absolutely. You'll find a link to Willy Salzedo's conference in the show notes, along with some info about the legendary Jacob Desvarieux, and of course, the incredible music of Kris Jam.
So crank it up, get those dancing shoes back on, and get ready to be swept away by the rhythm of Zouk. Until next time, keep those ears open and the music playing.